learning, creating the landscape of our life. Jeremy Sutton.
In the year 1501, Michelangelo stood before a block of marble, more than 5 meters high. The project, in his mind, was not to carve a man into the marble, but rather he saw David trapped inside the pillar, and it was his job to set him free. Toastmasters and guests, I mention this moment in history because the insights of Michelangelo can serve us today in the present. Many of us don't consider ourselves to be artists, but maybe we should. In fact, we are all creative, and we're actually the primary artist in that which will become our greatest masterpiece, our own lives. And we all have potential within, trapped inside this bulk of matter and brain, just waiting to be released. But it takes 3 key qualities to be able to reach our fullest potential. One is the creative impulse. Another is deep knowledge. And the third, developed skills. However, these are not easily developed. Michelangelo himself once said, "If people only knew how hard I worked to gain my mastery, they wouldn't find it so wonderful at all." But we don't need to reference Renaissance artists to find how these traits are important to us today. Harvard-based adult developmental psychologist Robert Keegan describes one of the highest stages of psychological development as the self-authoring self. What does he mean by this? Well, when we're a child, our identity, our story, is scripted by our society, our parents, our culture, our peer group. But at some point, we reach a level of awareness where we can take the pen into our own hands and begin to write our story from this point forward. Now here the creative metaphors move from sculpting into writing, yet the same 3 traits are important. Without the creative impulse, we are always waiting for someone else to tell us what to do. They are the authors of our lives. Without knowledge, we don't know where we've come from, how that affects us in the present, or where we might like to go in the future. And without skills, we have no way of actually getting there. Underlying these traits is learning. And whether we're learning knowledge or skills requires a different approach. And the approaches can be compared to the differences between painting and drawing. See, painting and drawing use different mediums, so how we create an image with either of these necessarily differs. If we're to create a landscape, a sky with mountains, a barn, and perhaps a horse in the front, for painting, because we can add layers, we need to start with the back in broad scale, and we can add layers over top, adding the mountains, the barn, and the horse. With drawing, however, we need to start with the central object, because it's not easy to layer something on top. And then we add the barn, the mountains, and the sky behind that. Learning knowledge is like painting. Imagine any course you've ever taken. In the early lectures, the professor will start with the background, the broad landscape, and over subsequent lectures we'll add details, the mountains, and other objects, and we'll connect the dots as we go. Learning skills, however, is exactly the opposite. Take learning the guitar, for instance. Perhaps we all would love to reel into a guitar rock solo. However, that is a little bit impossible until we've mastered the central skill of pressing the string with one finger and plucking that string at the same time with the other. Then we might add chords, add songs, and add the background theory to help us get into that solo. Many of the great leaders throughout history have echoed these traits. Martin Luther King Jr., for example, was not content to be stuck in his role that society dictated him. With the creative impulse, he led a whole nation of people against oppression, against the flows of society of that time. He demonstrated his knowledge through the wonders of his speeches, and he delivered them with such skill that it could uplift the people to go against what was normal or seemed right at the time. We could talk about Gandhi. We could talk about Mozart, Einstein, or many great people throughout history. But I would encourage you to consider people who personally inspire you. How have they drawn on these skills, the creative impulse, knowledge, and developed skills, to realize their own versions of success? By looking at their example, we can take these skills into our own life so that we can then apply them in realizing our own versions of success. So whether we're picking up the chisel to realize our deepest potential, whether we're taking the pen into our own hands so that we can author our lives from this point forward, whether we're painting a landscape of ideas and understanding so that we can better realize where we've come from and where we'd like to go, or whether we're drawing on skills so we can actually take us to realize these dreams, we all must become artists if we are to make our lives and this world our greatest masterpieces.